All right, here we are. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Coach Veronica Marie, and this is part one of a three-part series called Enhance Your Listening. I love doing these teachings because I know that nobody is born with these skills. We're not raised with the skills. And so most of the time we kind of fumble through life, through conversations, through relationships, and we learn by trial and error, and some people don't learn at all. And it is my desire to help you live a healthier and a happier life and an easier life, right? By educating and coaching and things of that nature. So we are here to talk about listening, and I want to jump right in. In order to talk about listening, we have to understand the ways that we listen. Um, there is active listening, there's passive listening. And what I really want to talk about is active listening, but I want to add to active engaged listening. Hold on 1 second. Engaged listening. Now, this type of listening is important when you want to be close to a person. Okay. This is not the type of listening that you would do just in casual conversation unless you wanted to practice it. This listening is the type that will cause you to engage, to deepen, to become closer, to know, to understand, and also quite possibly to be known. So, with that engaged listening, I think it's important. For some people, this is going to be a review. For others, it's new information. Either way, I don't think we can hear enough about this cycle. There's a cycle that underlies all hard conversations. It's the undercurrent of all relationship hardship, right? And it's a very simple cycle that I want to introduce or review for some of you. And it's called the fear cycle. The fear cycle starts when something happens, an event happens, and you feel activated in your emotions. When your emotions are activated, you begin to want something. When you want the thing, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen, you begin to fear or practice avoidance. Once fear sets in, you are going to act to reduce the fear, to reduce the anxiety, to reduce whatever contraction. That action is usually triggering for another person. They begin to want something, looks like they're not going to get what they want. They begin to feel fear and act in order to reduce the fear or the tension, however we want to put it. And the cycle continues on and on and on. So if you know parts of the cycle, then you can understand how to break the cycle where listening is concerned. And so the part of the cycle that I want to focus on tonight is the want, the personal want. Everybody wants something. I call these intangibles, right? So I'm going to list some, and then if you have any, you can type them in the chat. I don't want you to take the phone off of mute until we're at the end where we can ask questions and kind of chat a little bit. Some intangibles that most people want. Most humans want to feel significant. Most humans want to feel regarded. Most humans want to feel understood. Most humans want to feel accepted. Most humans want grace. Most humans want forgiveness, right? Most humans want a sense of belonging. Most humans want connection. Okay. So I put the question out there to you. What do you want? Humans want clarity, right? Humans want details. The question is, what is it that you want, right? When you are in conflict, what do you want? If you find that difficult to think about right now, just go back in your memory to a time where you felt agitated, right? You don't even have to have a deep agitation, just a slight agitation. What did you want? What intangible? I want you to get used to naming the intangible. And remember, if there are any more intangibles that you want to add that you find are important, please do type them in the chat, right? You want something. What do I want? The question begins with self, because when you understand what you want, you will better understand what other people want. A lot of times when you don't know what you want, because you haven't taken a significant amount of time to think about it, you will have less patience with others, especially if they are not very good at communicating, right? So what intangibles are important to me? And those intangibles are valid, right? A lot of times we have a way of trivializing or minimizing the things that we really want in relationships, in communication, in conflict, because we have come across people who could not offer it, or people with whom we could not cultivate it. And so we think that the problem is the intangible, the thing that I want. So I'll stop wanting it. But the real thing is, the real question is, have I been aligning with souls who see things similarly, in order that I can feel satisfied, such that when I come across other souls who don't offer the intangibles or create them with me, I'm okay. When the soul feels dry and parched, where these intangibles are concerned, you become emotionally unavailable, right? You begin to fear that you might be wanting too much. Maybe someone has said you wanted too much. All of these things happen. But I'm here to tell you that what you want is important. It's crucial, because when you deeply understand your own wants, you're going to highly regard other people's wants. Let's call them desires. When you highly regard your own desires, you will highly regard other people's desires. Now, when I say highly regard, I'm not talking about demand and fuss and complain. I'm talking about you regard your desires so deeply, so profoundly, that you focus on alignment with people who meet those intangible desires, who want that too, who value it also. Right. So if I were to bring this in a personal realm, for me, I recognize that honor is a desire that I have. Honor. And there was a time in my life where I was aligning with people who neither understood honor nor could offer it. So the deeper I understood my desire and my pleasure in honor, the more I wanted to offer it. And the more I came into contact with beings who also felt that same way. Also, what happened is people who had not significantly thought about honor began to be interested, right? It's a ripple effect. So, what intangibles do you want most when you are in conflict? What do you desire most? Because remember, the cycle really kicks in when it looks like you're not going to get what you want. You begin to fear. So let's bring that into an example, right? Um, if it looks like if you want respect, but it looks like you're not going to get respect because the person is yelling and screaming and doing whatever it is that they're doing, you're going to contract. You're going to brace, right? And then the behavior that will come forward will be in an effort to reduce that contraction and tension. You might blow it off and say, who they talking to? They're not talking to me. You might engage and yell and scream as well. You may engage in some other way. You know your patterns. I don't. But what I am saying is that when it looks like you're not going to get what you want, there's a reaction inside. It's usually some sort of discomfort, contraction, tension. We can apply a lot of words there. So the second question is, what do you do when you begin to see that you may not get what you want? Do you go silent? Do you go passive aggressive and such? And you may say, what does this have to do with listening? Well, you can only listen to others at the depth at which you understand yourself. If you don't have a deep understanding of yourself, then you're going to trivialize and minimize other people's emotions, and they will do the same thing with you. So, what intangibles are most important to you when conflict arises? Or you could also take this outside of conflict, just in general, right? Positivity is important. Positive outlooks on life are important to me, and that's outside of conflict. It's important that I align with beings who have worldviews or belief systems that harmonize with universal truth. That's important, right? What is it that you want, and what is it that you want deeply? And when it looks like you're not going to get what you want, particularly in conflict, how do you behave? Do you lash out? Do you pull back? What is it that you do? I'll leave that up to you. So that's the first part, understanding self, because this first part is a very real component of the fear cycle. And remember, I told you this cycle is a dynamic that is in the undercurrent of every conflict in relationships. But not only that, not just conflict, everyday interaction. People are communicating because they want something. They are communicating because they want to avoid something. They are acting because they want to avoid or create something because they want it. You got to understand this, right? So if we were to apply this to others in conflict, it's important, number one, for you to realize that other people want things just like you do, the intangibles. They usually want some very similar intangibles. Okay. In order to identify the intangibles, number one, again, you would have to think deeply about this within your own self. But number two, you would have to be engaged in listening rather than engaged in your triggers. I really don't like the word trigger, but I use it because it's common and most people understand it. But what I want to call it is emotional activation. When you are engaged, are you listening through your emotions, or are you listening, right, from the standpoint of understanding this cycle? This cycle is going to help you come out. This fear cycle, understanding the fear cycle, is going to help you come out of listening through your emotions and your interpretations. A lot of times you are reacting to your interpretation of something that someone said rather than what they actually said, if you're unaware that your emotions are the filter. We don't want the emotions to filter other people's words. We don't want our interpretations to filter other people's words. We want to hear the pure, unadulterated word coming from the individual. How do you do that? You got to know yourself, right? Again, know thyself. So, do you commonly listen through your emotions and your interpretations, or are you able to hear what the person is actually saying? Let me give you an example. So let's say the person says, I can remember, this is a literal example. I can remember being in a home with a couple, and they were having a hard time, obviously. And the wife said, I'm not happy. She just had an outburst. She was washing dishes. She said, I'm not happy. No, it was an outburst. So the husband walked in and said, so you're saying that you've never been happy? So you're saying there's nothing? And he just continued on. There's a lot of interpretation in that. He was listening through his filter, his emotions, his interpretations. She said, I'm not happy. He interpreted it and said, so you're saying you've never been happy? That's not what she said. But there was some emotional activation within him, and he wanted something, right? Some intangible. He wanted to feel something. And when it looked like he wasn't going to get that, whatever the intangible was, he reacted. He lashed out with his interpretations. That was not engaged listening at all. In order to communicate in that type of hot seat, there are a few things that you have to do, right? Beyond knowing your desires and your fears and how you behave, beyond that, you have to know what is actually being activated within you, right? Because he was reacting to something else, not what she was saying in that moment. You know this because of his interpretation. He took some other factors into his mind and into his logic and came out with an interpretation. So guess what she said? That's not what I said. You always do that. Okay, so there's her trigger. She wants understanding. Looks like she's not going to get it. She begins to generalize. You always do that. Here we go. That's not what I said. She wants to be heard. She wants to be understood. But none of that can happen because of the triggers. The husband wanted to be heard and understood as well, intangibles. But don't just stop at the intangibles of being heard and understood. Like really go far into it because there's some specifics beyond understanding. Because think about it, sometimes people have understood you and you still didn't feel resolved. They have said, I understand, I get what you're saying, but you still didn't feel resolved because there was some more intangibles that you wanted. Right. So a lot of times you are listening through your emotional filter, through your interpretation, not into what the person is saying. And so you have to know what your triggers are and understand. And we'll talk more about this later, but understand that what you're reacting to is not the current situation. What you're reacting to is not the current situation. You are most likely reacting to some other things that have happened that were similar, that have built up. You feel the tension and you're responding and reacting to that. I taught a course last year called Deactivate Your Triggers. I think that course is worth listening to because while it isn't the topic of this Enhance Your Listening course, it is a crucial component of it. Deactivate your triggers. And so if you want those links, you can let me know. All of you on here know how to contact me. So you can send the link and I'll get that to you. Without deactivating your triggers, you will continue to behave in the same ways and block incoming information. Enhance Your Listening is the title of this teaching, and this is part one of the teaching. Your self-reflection. Look at times where, and I need you to be very specific here. Think about a time where a person said something to you, you interpreted it, and they said, that's not what I said. See if you can see how your interpretation came in. Your interpretations are a huge part of your emotional wellness. If your interpretations are distorted and coming from unresolved past, you block incoming information you cannot hear. Okay. So this is just part one. I want to leave you with two other concepts. When a person is talking to you, you need to listen to two things. What they're actually saying, the words that they're using, the sentences, right? And you need to understand, well, you need to not take for granted that you know what they mean. Do not take for granted that you know what a person means. This is when you're trying to be close, when you're really trying to move in understanding. If the person says, I'm not happy, then you need to ask, well, what makes you the most unhappy here? Not just go into a defense. If someone says something about you and you immediately begin to defend, you got to look into that area, right? And again, hear what the person is saying and ask about what they mean. Now, stay away from asking this exact question too much. What does that mean? What does that look like for you? You almost sound robotic, right? So try to use some of the person's words and ask them to tell you more. You said you weren't happy, right? And I get that, but I want to know exactly what you're not happy about. If you ask a person, how was your day? And they say the day was good, right? Then you may inquire about the goodness of it. If the person says, I have a problem with you when you did X, Y, and Z, you can ask, how did that affect you? Realize you're not going to be able to ask any of this until you get a good handle on your triggers. Again, I can send that link to you. Listening through activated emotion, I'm calling that a trigger, will block incoming information. It sends you into an autopilot. It sends you into unconsciousness. You begin to interact with the contents of your brain rather than the person outside. And I will stop right there. Let's see if there are any questions here. And I know this is just part one, so we'll get deeper into this, but are there any questions about what I said tonight? And you'll have to take yourself off of mute, or you can type it in the chat down below. All right. So before we go, one other thing. Get a handle on this. Thinking for other people. You need to stop that. It blocks information, right? I didn't want you to think that such and such, so I did this. Stop that. Well, I didn't want you to feel that I didn't care, so I did this. Stop that. It blocks incoming information. It doesn't allow you to listen. If you want to know something, ask it. If you don't want a person to think something, say it. And then ask, well, is this what you feel? Um, does that make sense? I want to say to you that even though I can't bring you to work, I still care about, the how you get to work. Does that make sense? As opposed to, well, I didn't want you to think I didn't want to bring you to work, so I sent a lift over. Whatever. That's you interacting with your mind, your projections. You are not interacting with the person outside of you. You need to practice interacting with the people outside of you. Also, going back to that fear cycle, what do you think that when a person is speaking to you, what do you think they want? That's a question, right? We asked, what do you want? What intangibles? What intangibles could this person be asking for? That's a good start. That's listening beyond the words. What intangibles could they be asking for? I'm going to lead you into some ways of bringing that to the forefront of a conversation. But for now, it's enough for you to know that people are communicating because they want some intangible. It's up to us to discover what it is because sometimes they don't have the words. Sometimes they are unaware that there is even an intangible they desire. When you're trying to be close to someone, these are things to think about, but be selective on who you offer this, on where you offer this level of hearing, of listening, because it does take effort. It takes effort. It takes energy too. Okay, Michelle, go ahead. I see the hand up.
So sometimes I think like when we're talking to someone and we're asking, like when they're wanting to be heard, I think sometimes it feels like, and I don't know if this is like a trigger or not for us, but I think sometimes it feels like they just want to be right. And so if, they're saying something and you disagree, their goal is to be right, not necessarily to be heard or understood. And I feel like, and not in all situations, but I think that there are some I've encountered where it didn't matter if I explained, but their goal was to be right, not necessarily like heard or understood. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
let's kind of talk about that. That's a good example.
Mm-hmm.
So a person first know this, that a person who wants to be right does want to be heard and understood. They do want
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole reason for the communication and the adamance about it. But usually when a person wants to be right, right, it's because there isn't a heart connection going on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They have come away from the soul connection. They've come away probably even from their own ways of interacting into probably a logical space more than likely. So a person who is being logical may want facts. So instead of disagreeing with a person who wants to be right, because there's nothing wrong with that. If we think
Mm-hmm.
about it, we all want to be right. Let's be honest,
Mm-hmm.
right? No, nobody communicates and they're okay just, with whatever. We do want to be, but let's add some other verbiage to this, right? We want to be understood in a deep way, acknowledged, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
or reconnected in some kind of way. So I might, instead of disagreeing with a person who wants to be right, if I'm trying to be close to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? The thing I would ask is what's most important to you in this communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reconnecting with the soul rather than disagreeing. Disagreeing is
Mm-hmm.
staying on the mental level, right? But if you want to be on the soulful level or the heart level, whatever word we want to apply, then you don't want to disagree. If you know that a person is adamant about being right, I wouldn't disagree with them. That's not the way to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
The strategy would be to understand their passion, right? I can tell that this is really important to you, right? What part's most important? It seems
Mm-hmm.
like you have a certain way of thinking about this, and I want to understand how that plays out in your world. How
Mm-hmm.
important is it, right?
Right.
Because the instinct is to brace against that. But remember that even a person who wants to be right, um, may be a person that you love and care about. So if we start hyper focusing on what's right, then we may never get the closeness we desire, right? So a way to disarm a person who needs to be right is I can tell this is really important to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to spend a lot of energy in disagreement because I don't think that's going to help. So tell me what makes this really important. Like, help me understand it because I see the passion.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that it's important that you see that I think this particular way. If I don't think this way, how does it affect you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
If I do think this way, see, we get go away from they just want to be right into engaged listening. What intangible do they want? Usually it's not that they just want to be right. It's coming across that way, right? And so later in this series, I would like to teach a little bit more about how to hear what a person is saying beneath the words, beneath the passion, right? Because beneath the passion is a desperation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would wonder what is fueling the desperation of it, right? Are they fearing something? That are they reacting because somewhere in the past they've been invalidated? I don't know. So I would become interested in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I do feel like I guess my next question, I think you've already answered it, is like when they're adamant about that, at what point when you're not coming to an understanding, do you just let it go? But I think the questions that you ask are very disarming, and then that would hopefully like ease them up a little bit, like soften it, like,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm really trying to understand you. So I'm
Yeah.
really, trying to see, like, when you said I see how passionate you are about this, I'm trying to understand. And I think that
Mhm.
really disarms and kind of takes out the wanting to be right, and then like feeling understood or feeling like somebody wants to understand is how you disarm that situation.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
realize when you're disagreeing, you want to be right.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you really want? You want them to see your point, be heard, be
Mm-hmm.
understood, respected, significant, things of that nature. So if we could come off of that surface of fussing about the thing that we're fussing about and cut into the intangibles, right? That's where
Mm-hmm.
the heart connection happens, and we can stop being adversarial. We can stop being on opposing poles, right? Because we're not enemies. We're really wanting to understand at the heart level. But in order to do that, I got to stop feeling defensive about the fact that you want to be right. You could want to be right. I be wanting to be right too. Who don't want to be
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so there's this phrase that has been going on for years. I can remember reading it in a book, and it was profound to me at the time that I read it. It was back in 2000, probably 2010. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be close? Well, I want both,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
because and what let's use another word other than being right. Do you want to be understood deeply? Do you want to be heard? Absolutely. And I want to be close. So how can I accomplish this? I think if we come away from labeling, they just want to be right, and go into the intangible that they want,
Mm-hmm.
then that's going to stop you from feeling defensive. That's
Mm-hmm.
going to stop you from focusing on disagreement, because you could disagree and not contract. You can disagree and still understand. You could disagree and that person could still walk away feeling heard, right?
Right.
But it's an art and a skill to disagreement. And most people want to say, well, I disagree. And right
Mm-hmm.
away, right, there's problems about to have babies in that, because now that person is triggered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's going back into what intangibles do we want. We begin to engage in this push and pull dynamic with people that we really want to be close to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's
You're
helpful.
welcome. Yeah. And if it didn't make sense, or something in it needs more clarifying, we can do that. We have about 5 more minutes.
I thought that was really helpful.
Yeah, well, good, good. So remember, we're talking about intimate spaces, close spaces, spaces where you really want to engage with the person. We gotta come off of the activated emotional level, right? And go into the intangibles. What could this person be wanting right now? Right? And I'm gonna give you a little hint. If you ask what could this person be wanting right now and you contract, you probably didn't hit the heart of it. Okay. So so for example, they just want to be right. A lot of people say that. My son said that about one of my other sons. He just wants to be right. It's like he thinks he knows everything. Hold up, wait a minute. Let's use some more honor here, right? Because once you think a person just wants to be right and they just don't want to hear anything, we move into diminishment of their perspective. And anybody who feels diminished is going to become more passionate or more passive, right? So let's use some other words, right? Like when he gets in a certain mood, he doesn't listen the way I want him to. Facts, right? As opposed to judging the person. How about let's describe what is happening? This person gets in a lot of passion and they stop listening. Then the follow-up question is, what is the passion about, and how can I move into a deeper understanding rather than trying to get them to see the point that they are a certain way? We go in all these circles because we have not seen healthy communication. And that's part of my passion here, to help us enhance listening and hopefully have more closeness with the people who matter to us. All right, so that is it. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. I hope to see you again next Sunday at the same time as we learn to enhance our listening skills. If you're watching the replay, you can comment. Yeah, because I'm streaming on YouTube. You can comment on the video, and I'll be sure to reply. All right. Well, y'all have a good night, and I'll see you next Sunday.